And we are on. I'm a little bit early this week, so I will just go over there and turn my computer speakers off because I can hear them making a funny noise in the background. And we'll be getting started in just a second. Ooh. Oh, hello, Steve Loger. Sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. Good morning, wherever you are. USA, I suppose, is it, if it's morning where you are? Thanks for tuning in. I'm afraid it's going to be, Folky Fridays this week is going to be somewhat shorter than usual, for two reasons. Number one, I'm off to Wales to do a big long charity bike ride tomorrow, and I've got loads of videos to edit in order to keep uploading them while I'm away, and also lots of packing to do that I haven't had a chance to do anything on yet. I managed to go out running yesterday and lose my house keys, so I spent all day faffing about trying to find those and then get new ones to replace them with. So I'm very, very behind with everything, I'm afraid. So it's going to be a bit of a flying visit. And the other reason is that because I've spent all day using my phone for stuff, the blooming thing is nearly out of battery. So it's going to be a slightly shorter, a condensed version. So I'll try and leave out as much unnecessary waffle as possible today. But yeah, let's get started. So what nice one. Oh, that's good. Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers. I'm glad you're enjoying them. Yeah. Well, yeah. What I want to talk about today is something that I kind of actually covered in one of the first Folky Fridays that I ever did. But I think it's a topic that people kind of don't really get enough of, and certainly for folky players, if you're not playing with other people a lot, which obviously nobody is at the moment, then it's really hard to train your ears without playing with other people. And in the modern world where I think people are learning music more and more in absence of other people, it's really important to try and train them as much as possible in any other way that's available to you. So I kind of just want to very quickly run you through some ear training exercises that I found useful and still do find useful, in the hope that they'll be helpful to people. I'm not entirely sure who else we've got watching today, so I don't really know what level you're all at. Some of you probably kind of naturally do all this stuff already, and for some people it'll be a complete new thing. But yeah, so one of the first things that's really useful for backing guitarists is just recognizing the modes, and it's quite often, it's very easy to begin with to say if a tune is major, and it's fairly easy to say if it's minor. Mixolydian can be a bit harder, and between Dorian and Aeolian can be really very difficult. So one thing that I think is a really useful exercise for people to do is to learn the mode shapes. You can find them all for free as well on a blog that I wrote a little while ago. If you go on the Finale Guitar website, there's a section in the top bar called Learning. I'm afraid, because of the nature of my website, it takes a long time to load. But on there somewhere, if you scroll down, there's a blog called something like Most Useful Bit of Music Theory Modes for Celtic Music. And if you look on there, there's actually diagrams for all of these that you can practice. So the Ionian mode, for example, I like to play it like this. Like that. And what I suggest you do, this is a really, really useful thing, is get used to playing it, get your ears used to it, and then get used to singing it, and sing each note before you play it. And that is going to train your ears to hear the sound before you make the finger movement, and they'll then associate that shape with that interval, that sound that's going to come next. The good thing about that is these shapes, the ones that I recommend on that blog, they're all movable. Yeah, I like 3 note per string because of this thing of it being movable. You will also, as well with that, you always have one string that only has 2 notes on it, and so you can kind of remember each shape by which string it only has 2 notes. So I find that quite helpful for remembering which is which. It's not ideal for stuff like trying to arrange fingerstyle and things like that, of course. There are other better shapes for doing things like that. But for just learning about music theory, I think these shapes are the best ones. Once you've got the hang of doing that and being able to sing each shape, I also recommend just playing the root note and singing the shape on its own, and then practicing playing the shape. The next thing to do is try learning to play it in thirds. So you go 2 up, 1 back, 2 up, 1 back, 2 up, 1 back, 2 up, 1 back, and so on. And when I'm doing that, I would then, once I've got used to playing it and knowing how it sounds, I'd then sing it before I play it. So da 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 da. Then it becomes uncomfortably high to sing and I have to stop. But you get the idea. Once you get good at doing that for one mode, a useful thing after that is to switch then to the next mode. So in this case, if I started on G Dorian, I'd move up to A Aeolian. Sorry, that was nonsense. If I started on G Ionian, I'd move up to A Dorian. And the reason for that is that G Ionian has the same notes as A Dorian, because A Dorian is the second mode, Ionian is the first mode, and so if you go back 1 in the alphabet, you're going to end up with another mode with the same notes. So A Dorian, second mode, same notes as G Ionian, first mode. And for those of you out there who've got mode wheels, you can see that on the mode wheel if you turn it to G Ionian. There we go. You can see on there, hey Ed, welcome aboard. You can see on there we've got G Ionian and then A Dorian, and they've got all the same notes in their scales. So then I would learn the A Dorian shape and do all the same exercises with that, so playing the root note and then just singing the whole thing, and then playing it back to double check that I sung it right, and so on, and then learning to play it in thirds. Etc, etc, you know, and sing it in both of those ways. Then the next thing that you do is the same deal for Mixolydian and the same deal for Aeolian. And then the really important part then is if you then pick any given root note, so let's take, for example, let's take A. Because those shapes are all movable, I can play A major, A Ionian, and then I can compare it to A Dorian and really internalize which notes are different. So between A Ionian and A Dorian, you've got the third and the flattened seventh, the third and the seventh which change, so they both get a semitone flatter. So if I compare my da 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 da, and then I compare that to Dorian, da 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 da, then I can kind of really internalize what those different intervals are, the two that have changed, and I can see that as well by comparing those two shapes. That's a really useful thing. And then what you want to be able to aim for is to try and play yourself a root note, say, let's say Dorian, for example, and be able to sing just from that root note, the Dorian mode starting from that note, by kind of remembering the characteristic sound of each mode, which I think is easier if you've kind of compared them all and memorized what the differences are. It's useful to kind of intellectually memorize that, for example, Dorian has a flat third and a flat seventh. Aeolian has a flat third, a flat seventh, and a flat sixth. But more important than that, it's much more useful to kind of memorize it by feeling that Dorian feels like a minor scale but a more optimistic one, and Aeolian feels like a more pessimistic one. So yeah, I do think with these ear training exercises, a lot of it is kind of by feeling, and that's why it's easier and probably better, to be honest, to try and pick it up from playing with other musicians. But if you can't do that, then these are things that will help you out. Now my battery is on 1%. I'm really sorry. I did try and charge it in time, but I didn't get back from the key cutting shop. So if I die on you, I'm very sorry. Next week's thing, I'm just going to plug this. Next week, I've got a special guest on the show. My mum's going to be. I'm off to visit my mum next week, so my mum's going to be on the programme. So we'll probably just play some tunes and maybe have a chat about chords and tunes and don't know, this and that. But it should be fun anyway. So next week should be a good one. So tune in for that. But I'm going to carry on anyway, and when it cuts off, it cuts off. So that's what I wanted to say about modes. The next thing that's really, really useful for backing guitarists is just getting the feel of chords related to a key centre. And this is a thing which I think is really missing from a lot of music tuition full stop, really. There's a lot of, for example, there's a lot of mobile phone apps out there which do things like recognise this interval. Is it a major third? Is it a minor third? Is it a flattened seventh? Or whatever, you know, they play two notes together and you have to say what the interval is. And that is really good. That's very helpful, and it is training your ears and it's training your brain to spot intervals. But it's not as useful as relating intervals to a key centre is. So what I mean by that is, if you, let's say we've got a tune in the key of G. I'm just going to take the Kafunken jig as an example because I often use that one for stuff. So there's G, our key centre. So if I hear, that's the start of the tune. So that first gap, for example, that's a major third. But what really matters is not the gap between the two adjacent notes. What's really important is how any little set of notes relates to the key centre. And this is actually what you're internally doing when you pick out where chords 1, 4 and 5 go, which is kind of your starting point really for working out any more advanced chords you can play along with a tune. So in order to pick chords to back a tune, what you're really doing is deleting all the less important notes from the tune and just focusing on the ones that land on the dominant beats. So when you hear a jig, for example, in every bar of a jig there are 6 quavers or 6 eighth beats for the Americans out there. And of those 6, in Irish music it tends to be that all those quavers will have a note on them, or maybe often in a jig you'll have crotchet taking up the first 2 and then the rest quavers. So in this tune, for example, bar 1 goes da, 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 dum. So you've got a crotchet on the first 2, long G, ba, 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 bum. But of those 6, you don't have to know what all of the notes are in order to know that's a chord 1 section. I mean, you know it's a chord 1 section because it's the beginning of a tune in G, so obviously it's going to be a G chord. But also, you know it's a chord 1 section because the important quavers in that bar are the ones that your foot stomps on, and the others can be more or less disregarded. This is especially true for Irish music for a reason which, if my battery doesn't die, I'll come back to in a second. But yeah, so you've got G, B, and really that G and that B, the ones with your foot stomps, because those are the accentuated ones, they're the ones that you want to focus in on for picking chords. Now going back to my thing about chords related to key centres, notes related to key centres rather, if your key centre is G, then G and B are the root note and its major third. And that is really what you want to be focusing on when you hear a tune. If I look at the next bar then, So the next bar goes da 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 dum. So we've got ba ma 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 da da. Those are our important ones, and those are long major third and a long second. So long B and long A. So that means really your chord options for that bar are either chord 1, if we're thinking just in terms of chords 1, 4 and 5. Chord 1 because B is its major third, and the major third is in chord 1. Chord 1's notes 1, 3 and 5 from the major scale, you know. So we're hearing a very chord 1-y note there. And then the A, well, the A's not firmly in chord 1 or chord 4, so we basically just disregard that. The way to train your ears for this kind of picking out things, notes related to key centers, I think a good way to do it is to just play a chord like G, and then pick any note from your G major scale shape at random. So maybe just run through the shape without playing any of it and then stop on one. So let's take that one there. So what I've stopped on there, I'm going to ignore the fact that I know what it is, but I'm going to play that and compare it to G. It may be that you're kind of at a level where you already recognise a lot of these intervals, but it may be that you don't. So some intervals are very recognisable, like this one. If I play those two together, it's very consonant, it sounds very solid, that's a fifth. But this one, that's quite tricky. And the way that you can then get used to getting the feel for them and working them out is to start from the first one and sing your way through the scale as you practiced in the first exercise there until you get to your second note, and then count how many steps it was. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we know that that's the 7th note from the major scale, aka the major 7th. So yeah, this is a bit of a kind of roundabout route that I've gone on to tell you about this, isn't it? But really what you want to try and practice doing is listening to a tune, maybe play a little bit of it on YouTube, focus in on what those dominant beats are and try and remember the notes from those, and then work out in your head how those relate to the root note. If the note that you hear is the root note, or the root note's major third, or the root note's fifth, and it's not the 7th foot tap, which is where chord 5 always goes, then the chances are that is a chord 1 section. If the note that you hear on one of those dominant beats is the 4th note, or the 6th note, or, well, one of those two, really, only those two, because the other note in chord 4 is the root note at the top of the chord, so disregard that. So if the note is the 4th or the 6th, then it's probably a chord 4 section. And if it has the 7th note in it anywhere, especially if it's on one of the dominant beats, then the chances are you're in a chord 5 bit. This takes me back to what I was saying before. 7th notes do not crop up in Celtic music, hardly at all, apart from when it's in a section where it's the 7th foot tap bit where chord 5 goes. So if you think you've heard a 7th note on a dominant beat, just double check, because very rarely does that ever happen unless it's the 7th foot tap where chord 5 goes. Let's see, what else have I got to say about this? Oh, this is just another general thing, kind of feature of Celtic music, and most folk music, and in fact most popular music. People don't really like big jumps. Notes tend to go in small increments, like stairs. So with this tune, for example, we've got da 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 dum. So most of those notes are next door to one another, and it never performs a jump bigger than a third. So if you can always tell whether you're hearing a jump of a third, like it's gone up the scale but then missed one out and gone on to the next one, or the same thing going downwards, that's going to be really useful for kind of memorising tunes. And I'm going to sound a bit nuts here, but I have an internal way of memorising tunes which may help you or may not. In my mind, a scale kind of goes a, n, b, fe, sa, ne, e, or something like that. Each note of a major scale kind of has a sort of phonetic quality, and I've always kind of felt like that. And if I hum a scale, notes just kind of have a feeling, and it sounds crazy, but if you can kind of internalize how each note feels compared to the root note, so if I play them together, you can hear a bit what I mean, I hope, or you'll just think I'm bonkers, one or the other. But here's G on its own, here's G in the second, so that's kind of n. The third kind of goes b, the fourth kind of goes there, kind of like that. The fifth is very, very consonant. You know, the fifth sounds good together, the others don't really. The sixth doesn't sound bad, but anyway, you get the idea. And the seventh, very, very, very not consonant at all, not comfortable. And then you're back to the octave. So if you can kind of practice playing notes together and see if you can kind of get a feeling for how each note sounds, that might help, or not. What else did I want to say about this? We seem to be doing all right with the battery. I've been on 0% for about 5 minutes now, but hopefully it's going to carry on. Should we go on to that? Yeah, let's talk about chords as well. One thing that I think is really good is if you can find a sort of slow-ish recording of a guitarist who you like, ideally one who plays in a more traditional style and doesn't play any super complicated jazz chords, because that is more difficult to interpret. But maybe somebody like Ed Boyd or John Doyle, or you know, one of those kinds of players who plays a lot of the kind of nice traditional sounding chords without too many jazzy extra notes in them. There's loads of people. Yeah, but if you watch one of those players, if you can first recognise what key they're in, either by looking at what shapes they're playing, or by looking up the tune on the internet. You know, there's loads of resources where you can just Google a tune now and it'll tell you what key it's in. Have a look on the session.org or something like that. Then what you want to do is pause the recording, play the key chord, and then turn off the screen if you can, or just turn it round, stop looking at it, let what they're playing play, and try and listen and try and pick out when they're playing chords 1, 4 and 5, and when they're playing the related minors. If they're in a different mode than when they're playing chords 1, 4 and 5, you know, then let's say it's in Dorian, it's mainly going to be then chords 1, 7 and 5. But when you hear, let's say you're in E Dorian, if you hear E minor, you know what that sounds like because you've just played it to yourself. And then when you hear D, try and get the feeling for what D sounds like compared to E minor when you hear it. And just listen to other players play, maybe play them back on a slower... We've got some person with a stupid motorbike right outside my window. Yeah, if you play them back on a slower speed with YouTube or the Amazing Slowdowner or something like that, and just try and get used to being able to hear other people's chords and feel what those are. One thing that will help make your life easier with regards to that kind of thing is playing a chord and then trying to sing its root note So if I play an E minor bar chord way up here, the root note is La, La, and it's fairly easy to get used to picking out these root notes. Here's another one with A, La. And then once you get used to that, try playing a little chord progression. Let's take a chord progression in E Dorian. So I might play something like that, you know, with kind of E minor and then something based around A or A minor and then B minor. When you hear a progression like that, it's really good practice to try and sing the bass line of it. Even if you can't work out necessarily what those chords are, you can probably hear what they are, you just couldn't necessarily say what notes they were. And obviously hearing's the first step to understanding, and it's much more important to hear and feel what something is, even if you can't necessarily kind of intellectualize exactly what it is just yet. So with that progression, your bass line would be, so your bass line would be ding da 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 ding da da da. And then if that bass line got a bit, if the next round of the tune got a bit more complicated, maybe it might go. So that's something like da 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 da. So yeah, that's another really good exercise. And once you've worked out the bass line to a little chord progression, then you can fairly easily kind of loop that in your head and work out what the notes are. And from that, you can work out what the chords are. And ideally, what you're really aiming for is related to the key center to get the feeling for what each of the other chords, the other 6 or 5 chords available in that key, get the feeling for what each one of those chords sounds like related to your key chord. Last thing I'm going to say, because I'm very conscious of the fact that my battery is well and truly a zombie at the moment. Fair play to it. It's been officially dead for more than 10 minutes now. But yeah, the last thing I'm going to say is all these things are actually in my book, Backing Guitar Techniques for Traditional Celtic Music. And I know that pretty much everybody who tunes in to watch this already has this book. But in the audio that accompanied this book, I did actually do a thing where I recorded lots of chord progressions and I related them to a key center. And then your challenge is to try and listen back to those and work out what they are. And I think that's really good practice. If you get a sense, if you can try and internalize how a G chord feels compared to a D chord, for example, then when you're when you're trying to play along with a tune in the key of D major, you'll have a feeling like if I play G, it'll kind of make the tune feel more like this. All this is very subjective, so it's quite hard for me to describe exactly what it is. But yeah, I think that's a really good thing to practice, a really good thing to try and do by feeling rather than by trying to sort of intellectualize it too much. However, having grown up doing it by feeling and put a lot of thought into it, I have now actually become fascinated by trying to intellectualize it, and I have some theories about that to do with the ratios of frequencies that make scales work and harmony and all that stuff, which at some point, I always say this, I'll get around to making some videos about, because it doesn't really help you very much with playing because you can't think about it fast enough to use it for anything, but I do think it's absolutely fascinating. So it's on the to-do list. But yes. Just having a little look at my list of things. Is there anything else I really want to talk about? Oh, well, seeing as the battery seems to be surviving, very last thing for today is jazz arpeggios. which I haven't really talked about in any of my videos, but they're another thing that's really useful for your ear training. Here is a jazz arpeggio. There are 3 types of quote-unquote jazz arpeggios. What I mean by this is tetrad arpeggios, really. The notes that appear in a